Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first official episode of the cEDH cast. My name is Ian. With me, as always, is my co-host Braden.
Hi.
Hi. So we're going to start today's episode with a review of the year 2019 as we're coming into the cEDH community right at the end of 2019, going into 2020. And we want to just take the entire year, break it down, talk about all the good things, the great things, and the not so great things about 2019 in the cEDH format.
Yeah, I'm really excited to talk about it. It was a really big year for the format, and I think there's just almost too much to talk about.
We're going to start things off by kind of going through the sets of the years. We've built ourselves a little bit of a timeline here, and we're going to go through it, but a lot of that will involve the sets as they've been released through the year. And as we all know, this year started with Ravnica Allegiance. So, Braden, do you want to kick things off with your couple cards?
Sure. So I have 3 cards that I've pulled aside that I think were pretty important from Ravnica Allegiance. The first of which is Biomancer's Familiar. Biomancer's Familiar is a Training Grounds, but it's a 2/2 creature for 2. So it's a bear and a Training Grounds all at the same time. Training Grounds says all activated abilities of creatures you control cost 2 generic less to cast, but they can't cost less than 1 mana. So when you have a Biomancer's Familiar in play, your Thrasios might cost 2 colorless to activate instead of 4. Biomancer's Familiar only costs 2 mana. So the minute you put him out, he's already as efficient as having just activated Thrasios on his own. I've found it to be one of the more interesting cards from this year, and I've been playing it a lot more as the year's gone on. Another card that I pulled aside was Smothering Tithe. It's just broken. This card sees play from one end of the format to the other end of the format. You see people playing Smothering Tithe in their Risk the Redeem decks, and then you see Opus Thief, which is basically a deck built around Smothering Tithe. It's one of the only reasons to be in white besides Tymna, at least for a deck like that. I love Smothering Tithe. I'm so happy it exists, and every time an opponent casts a wheel with one in play, I get really sad.
Very true.
The final card I have pulled aside is Vannifar. I think the blue-green pod decks have not been explored enough. I've been personally looking into cards like Eldritch Evolution and Neoform and trying to see what kind of weird value we can get out of them. And Vannifar is a bit slow and a bit clunky, but I definitely think as the years go on, this card's going to get more and more powerful, a lot like Birthing Pod did in Modern. What about you, Ian?
Yeah, speaking of Neoform, which is going to probably come up a little later, the first card I actually have pulled to the side is Incubation Druid. Now, at the time of Ravnica Allegiance being launched, it was a pretty irrelevant card, and it's at the fringes at the very best right now, but decks like Kenrith are playing it sometimes with Vigian Graft Mage, which allows you to untap a creature with a 1/1 counter on it, and it has Graft, so they can automatically come in with that 1/1 counter. So there've been some Kenrith lines going infinite with Vigian Graft Mage and Incubation Druid, and it also, some people have been tinkering around with going like turn 1 Elf into Neoform into Incubation Druid for like a huge mana boost. So it's a weird card, but actually it was completely irrelevant at the time of the set release, which is funny. After that, I have Verity Circle, which is a card that it is the card that I look at to pull the most, and the card that I look at and say, I will never pull this card from my deck. Being a blue player in like a largely green cEDH meta, it is absolutely amazing. I mean, I've seen games where that card lands and draws you maybe upwards of 5 to 10 cards. And then there are those pods where you're playing against 2 blue-black X decks that are not running green, and it's useless. And that's, sometimes there's a bunch of cards like that in cEDH. Like, it has that same variance that like a Carpet of Flowers does, but for the times that it works, you definitely slam it down.
I will say one problem that Verity Circle has is that by being 3 mana, it kind of gets into that Rhystic Study slot.
Yes.
And in most metas, in my experience, Rhystic Study is just going to be a better card most of the time. There's more combos that Rhystic Study kind of is a little intrusive and stops. And there tends to be a lot more advantage from playing the turn 1 Rhystic Study than there is from the turn 1 Verity Circle or turn 2 Verity Circle and turn 2 Rhystic Study. So although the card is interesting and it can sometimes be a good Curse Totem impersonator, I found that it has some problems that Curse Totem doesn't have, but at the same time, you can play it in your creature decks. So It's definitely a give and take card, and I'm sure it's a lot of people's pet card.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily that it would, in my opinion, it should never replace a Rhystic Study. However, there are some decks that can afford and a Verity Circle, Rhystic Study plus Verity Circle, and if you can afford that in your deck, I think it goes right in. As far as card advantage engines in the blue slot, it's very good. The last card I have pulled aside is Lavinia. Lavinia Azorius Renegade came out, And a lot of people were really excited about it. So Lavinia says each opponent can't cast non-creature spells with converted mana costs greater than the number of lands that player controls. So in a format full of fast mana, that really does shut down non-creature focused decks. And it also says whenever an opponent casts a spell, if no mana was spent to cast it, counter that spell. So goodbye Mana Crypt, Force of Will, etc. The problem with Lavinia is, especially in our current meta, like if Lavinia had said in all actuality that no spells could be cast if their mana cost was greater than the number of lands you control, I think it would be a completely different card. I think it would be a very viable stacks card. As of right now, because the fact that it limits it to non-creatures, the deck runs into a lot of problems. Like, you just lose to a Najeela or a Yisan or any green deck that exists in the format. Even a lot of Thrastimna decks, like, you're not stopping them from doing their thing.
Another thing I found with Lavinia is that if you're trying to do knowledge pool locks, a lot of times people are playing cards like Abrupt Decay or Dovin's Veto, more specifically Abrupt Decay, and she counters the spell. So if they put Abrupt Decay under the knowledge pool, and then another opponent you have casts another instant, they can Abrupt Decay from under the knowledge pool, the Lavinia. Lavinia dies, and now your lock is completely canceled.
Yep.
So it's not just a open and shut case when you have a Lavinia and a knowledge pool out, which is kind of the entire appeal of the commander, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it kind of leads to some significant problems for the commander. Additionally, locking people out of the game isn't a very good way of ending the game. Especially when people can, pie in the sky say, I could just draw my Abrupt Decay.
Yeah, exactly. Moving on from there, we had the culmination of the Commander Advisory Group. So the RC, the Rules Committee, decided that they wanted outside voices who would be basically their liaison to the people. And through that, the CAG was created. Brayden, you said you wanted to go more into that?
Yeah, so the Commander Advisory Group, or the CAG, allows the Rules Committee to kind of extend its arms beyond itself and get opinions from the community that it wouldn't typically be able to get. And the biggest proof of that being a success is someone like Shivam Bhatt, who's a member of the CAG, who has become a huge defender of competitive EDH, despite the fact he doesn't play competitive EDH. I think he's only played it once or twice, and for a long time, his opinion of the format was from a place of having never played it or talked to people who have played it. When he became a member of the CAG, people like the Spike Feeders reached out to him, other members of the cEDH community, and helped him become more informed and introduce him to the way that people actually tried to play cEDH, trying to distance that idea of pub stomping from what cEDH is, because a lot of that is just a misunderstanding. Most cEDH players are not pub stomping.
Right.
Maybe all cEDH players aren't pub stomping.
Yeah.
So I think the CAG has been very successful at introducing people like us to the Rules Committee and also removing some of the stigma around the Rules Committee by making them seem more normal.
Yeah, there was this, for a very long time, the people kept using the term ivory tower. They thought that there was these 4 old white dudes in these like secret meetings who would just meet up and talk about Commander and what they wanted for the format. But now, they've done a significant effort to really contradict that idea. And it's appreciated by a lot of members of the community, especially the cEDH community, who I feel like our voice compared to where it was is completely different,
Yeah, thanks to the Commander Advisory Group introducing the Rules Committee to some of the members of the cEDH community, I know that there's like a Discord out there where they can all chat and give feedback back to the cEDH community, and the cEDH community, or the members that they've cherry-picked to represent the cEDH community, can give their feedback back to the Rules Committee. I'm not sure how often they communicate, but I think it's great that that even exists at all.
And it's a huge step. It's a huge step.
Absolutely. I know that Playing with Power got to play cEDH with Sheldon Menery. I got to play cEDH with Stibbs from the CAG. I know that the Spike Feeders have played with Shivam. They're getting introduced to the way that we enjoy playing, and they've been really kind and open to playing the way that we like to play. And I know I played casual EDH with Sheldon Menery, and I kind of mentioned that that's not something I would usually do, and I don't know if he appreciated that, but I enjoyed helping represent the community by playing the way that he enjoys playing.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot less of a solid line between people who love cEDH and people who play EDH. I found a lot of the community has opened up a lot more, and I think the CAG has a lot to do with it.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's move on to our next topic. So the second set of the year, and the next one we're going to talk about is War of the Spark. So Braden, why don't you start us off?
War of the Spark is one of the most influential sets in the history of Magic. Starting out with that hot take.
In the history of Magic period?
Yeah, I really do think so.
Yeah, I agree.
And for our format, I think War of the Spark maybe completely changed the entire meta. People were already moving towards Consult. Since the introduction of Labman Jace, Consult has become way more popular. It's almost the default win condition at this point. Having two win conditions that just end the game once you have no cards in your library makes Consult way more powerful, because now you can use it as an actual tutor far more often. Same goes towards Tainted Pact. Both those spells become much more powerful once you have 2 copies of Laboratory Maniac in your deck.
Right.
Additionally, Labman Jace is like a draw engine. Every turn, he's milling you for 2, which makes your regrowths a lot better, and he's drawing you a card. He can also mess with your opponent's top deck tutors if they have an Imperial Seal or a Personal Tutor or a Sylvan Tutor. You can just mill the top cards of their library. So the card's very powerful, and I think it's significantly changed the entire format. And I know there are a lot of other cards from this set that have done that too.
One thing with Lab Jace specifically, or Jace Builder of Mysteries, is that previously with the Consultation line, if you held up an Abrupt Decay, there was no way they were winning with that strategy. And, you know, a lot of creature removal specifically, it just doesn't affect it now that it's on a Planeswalker. Like, there's a lot of things that struggle to get rid of that Jace without just hard countering it.
Yeah, for sure. And in addition to Jace being 4 mana, the printing of Veil of Summer later in the year made this problem even more significant, especially since Veil of Summer cantrips. Now, the next card I wanted to talk about was Finale Devastation. And this might be a bit of a pet card, but I think this thing is really, really good. Finale Devastation is kind of like Time Twister in a way. Finale Devastation can get you a combo piece, it can be ramp, and it can be a win condition. I play a Gaia's Cradle in one of my decks. Sometimes I just turn my Gaia's Cradle sideways, and I cast Finale for 15, and the game is just over. Sure, they might mana drain it, and then it's a pretty big feel bad, but the fact that Finale has that like third option, which says like throw the game if they have mana drain, or run them over with your dorks, is pretty nutso.
Yeah. I was going to say, I knew you loved this card, but I was not expecting the Time Twister comparison.
I think it's not as good as Time Twister, but when you evaluate Time Twister is graveyard hate, it's a wheel, it's a combo piece, it's a game ender, it's like does so many things, and every time I have a Finale Devastation in my hand, I'm like, is this a 4-mana Bloom Tender? Is this a 4-mana Collector Oof?
Right.
Is this a 3-mana Noble Hierarch? Or is this a 12-mana win condition? Mm-hmm. Or is it a 7-mana Seedborn Muse? The card does so much. And if your opponents have an Avid Mind Sensor or an Ashiok or some other type of search hate, Finale just reanimates the best card in your graveyard. Sometimes that's a Gilded Drake. Sometimes that's a Seedborn Muse. Sometimes it's your commander that you let go there for some reason. Finale just always gets there.
Yeah.
I love this card. I think it's a pet card for sure, and I'm definitely overstating how good it is. But anytime a card is like on rate and also has like 5 other modes, it's like a cEDH staple. I think this card is probably going to be a cEDH staple.
Yeah, and not to mention, you're talking about it from your green Consultation lines, but like the fact that it also goes in every mono green cEDH deck. You know what I mean? Those decks, they got a big shot in the arm from that card.
For sure. Craterhoof costing 2 more mana is not that bad. Like sometimes Yisan just casts Craterhoof. Yeah. Additionally, I know I'm just gonna keep talking, but 4 mana Gilded Drake, not that bad.
That's
not
still pretty
that
good,
bad.
Man. You know it costs 5 Gitrog. That's fine. I'll take it for 4.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly how I feel. Now another card that's kind of similar to Finale, but way worse, is Neoform. I spent some of the year doing some janky Neoform stuff with Arena Rector and Leveler. Not gonna go too deep into that, but there's some janky stuff there. I also was playing Neoform with Thrasios and Tymna, trying to see like what are some good 3 and 4 drops that you can upgrade your Neoform into. You know, upgrading your Tymna into a Notion Thief can be pretty cute sometimes. Found that wasn't quite powerful enough, but they keep printing weird cards like Oakum Adversary, where they don't cost the cost they look like, and maybe eventually they'll print a commander like that breaks Neoform wide open. I do know that Tasigur sometimes Neoforms a Nezahal into play, and that's just absurd.
Ooh.
Yeah, so the card obviously has legs. It's a combo piece in Modern. It's very powerful. You can, in Blue Pod, you can neoform your Bruce Tarl into a Seedborn Muse. That's pretty sweet.
Yeah.
The card's kind of sick. So it's definitely not like Finale Devastation in terms of being a pet card for me personally. But I do think, again, kind of like I mentioned with some other cards, every year that card's just going to get better and better and better as they print weird, obscure cards that interact with it poorly. Or, poorly in terms of balancing, but very well for us.
Yeah, and it's interesting because now there's so much redundancy with that effect, because not only do we have Birthing Pod and Vanifar and Neoform, but we also have Eldritch Evolution. Like, these effects keep becoming consistent enough to where there's definitely going to be something. Well, I mean, we saw what happened in Modern with the Neobrand deck. That could happen for cEDH, where we get enough of these effects for it to be viable enough.
I'm currently playing a deck where when the game gets super grindy and people have blockers for Tymna, you just Eldritch Evolution your Tymna into a Seedborn Muse, and that's pretty good most of the time.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I'm enjoying the card. Again, Eldritch Evolution, no matter what you sack, you can get a Gilded Drake. Stuff like that, I think people need to explore a little bit more. I'm definitely not the best person to be exploring it, but I'm comfortable doing it, and I found some really cool stuff while I've been working on it.
Yeah. And I mean, just with the nature of the format itself, getting extra tutors is just good.
Absolutely. And creatures, you're incentivized to play creatures because creatures have the best tutors for some reason.
Yeah, because they keep pumping up green.
So every year they're going to print green tutors that get creatures and put them into play. And every couple years they'll probably print one that's better than it should be. And the format just gets a little bit more powerful and creatures just get a little bit better.
Yep.
So I'm excited to see where it goes. But there were 2 broken cards just from More of the Spark that did that. So I thought it was important to talk about.
All right, so the next card that I'm talking about is Fibblethip. Fibblethip the Lost is the... What a weird card, man. I originally saw it in, I think it was the Lab Maniac set review. They were talking about the viability of the card, and I'd heard sort of rumors. This was before I was really in the Discords for cEDH. I'd heard the musings that Fibblethip was playable, and someone came out with a primer, like, in the first 2 weeks, and I said, yes, this. I had some friends really getting into cEDH, and I was like, I want a deck that says, hey, I'm a weird dude, but I also can win sometimes. So, small investments got me up to having my transmute artifacts and things ready to jam that Proteus staff. So let's talk about the combo. Fibblethip says, first of all, he enters and can draw you a card, but if he enters from a library, he'll draw you 2 cards. So people started playing around Proteus Staff, which says that it's normally a polymorph effect, meaning that you would just tuck a creature in and then reveal the next one. But if there are no other creatures in the library, it has old wording and says you put the cards back in any order. So the line is to have Fibblethip as the only creature in the deck, which is, if you know anything about this meta, problematic and why not many people are on the list. So you get Proteus Staff out, you target Fibblethip, and you can rearrange your entire deck into any way you want. And you also draw 2 cards because Fibblethip is the only creature. The Proteus Staff checks, shuffles Fibblethip in. Oh wait, Fibblethip's the only thing there. Gets back on the battlefield, draws you 2 cards, and your deck is stacked exactly as you want. So with cards like Gush and a bunch of 0 mana rocks, you can usually assemble a dramatic reversal line to draw out your opponents, or it had a lot more win conditions when Paradox Engine was out. But that's basically the deck. So it was very fun to play with, as I said, but the Paradox Engine really was a real killer of that deck, and that's kind of why I'm not on it anymore.
Speaking of decks that were good when Paradox Engine was legal, Feather. So Feather was a Boros deck that allowed you to play instants and sorceries that targeted your Feather and drew a card over and over and over again so you could pull ahead of your opponents. But you're in Boros, so there are some problems with that. So the general plan was put an Isochron Scepter in play, put one of your cantrips under the Isochron Scepter, and then put a Paradox Engine in play too, and cast the cantrip until you draw your whole deck, then play an Aetherflux Reservoir. And while you're drawing your whole deck, you're making infinite mana. So once Paradox Engine got banned, Feather sadly wasn't playable. But for the short time after War of the Spark, and before Paradox Engine got banned, I was killing people with Feather using combat damage or infinite 2/2 wizards or Paradox Engine. That's how I was killing them.
Yeah, I remember the first time I ever saw you play it, you assembled Paradox Sunforger. And I was like, what
that's
in the hell is
insane.
happening?
Yeah, that's insane. If you have enough rocks out, you can cast every red or white instant in your deck, which is nuts.
That blew my mind when I first saw that, yeah.
Yeah. So another commander that came out this year was Niv Mizzet Reborn. And although Niv Mizzet was reborn, he quickly died shortly after. Niv Mizzet Reborn was the top tier food chain commander for like 7 weeks.
We could never get anything better.
Yeah, I remember when Niv got released, Shaper was freaking out. And then the first sliver came out a few weeks later. We'll be talking about it later. So, although new Niv was pretty cool, he ended up being pretty bad shortly after.
Now we're going to talk about some pretty cool counter spells that came out War of the Spark. That's Dovin's Veto and Narset's Reversal. One at a time, Dovin's Veto is just one of those cards that came out and everyone was like, oh, hey, look, a new staple. Especially given the fact that the best decks in the format are Thrasios Tymna decks and can play Dovin's Veto without any worries. It means that Dovin's Veto is not really going anywhere. It's just a very good card, and the fact that it's uncounterable is pretty amazing.
It's basically a strict upgrade to an already existing counterspell, Negate. It's almost strictly better, except it costs a white. But a lot of these decks are playing Tymna, so they already want to have white mana pretty consistently.
I mean, there's not much to say about the card other than we saw it, knew it was amazing, slam dunk. The next one's Narset's Reversal, which I've recently realized in conversation with Braden has more controversy than I was aware of. So Narset's Reversal is a very powerful card that allows you to copy an instant or sorcery that your opponent's casting, throw the original spell back in their hand, and lets you copy it for free. I was one of the few people lucky enough to snag an ad nauseum off of it and fell in love with the card ever since. But in talks with people playing the card and sort of actually as the format's progressed, it hasn't been performed nearly as well. I think just due to the lack of instant and sorceries that you really want to snag with it.
I think Ad Nauseam's a much worse card than it was when the War of the Spark came out, which is a pretty controversial thing to say. The game-winning cards went from being like Flash and Ad Nauseam to like Wheel of Fortune and Demonic Consultation, which are either cards you don't want to be casting copies of, or by putting the card back in its owner's hand and casting a copy of it, you're doing exactly what they were trying to do in the first place. Usually they want to refill their hand with the wheel, or they have a Smothering Tithe in play or a Narset in play, so they can make a typically symmetrical card like Wheel of Fortune into a asymmetrical card. Narset's Reversal isn't very good in those situations, so it's kind of gotten worse as the format has moved in that direction.
Right. And another thing is, because of the fact that it just bounces the spell back, it actually doesn't tax any resource. So unless you are grabbing something like a draw spell, it has a pretty significant downside. So, someone casts, say, a Demonic Consultation. One, if you're not playing console or you don't have your console win conditions out right now, like, you don't want to be casting a Demonic Consultation into the abyss. And then second of all, cards in cEDH are super cheap. Right? So sometimes you want to shut them off of a tutor or you want to shut them off of a consultation. And guess what? They have another mana.
Yeah, especially since if they are casting a card like Ad Nauseam and they see you have double blue open and they know you're on Counterspell, Mana Drain, or Narset's Reversal, they're going to be much less likely to just slam it.
Yeah. I gotta say, the Ad Nauseam and Fibblethip was real nice.
Yeah, it's pretty nuts.
Now, the last War of the Spark topic I really want to talk about was, I guess, abbreviated into just the 3-mana walkers. The largest of these is obviously Narset, Partner of the Veils. I mean, that card is seeing play in a ridiculous amount of decks. Any deck that can protect it, I would genuinely say should play it. If you play Wheels, you can protect that card, you should play that card. It is just amazing to be able to stop this resource fight that your opponents and you are playing and just slow them down to a significant degree. Obviously, if you resolve a wheel while you have a Narset, it's a blowout, and for many decks, they just consider it a soft win con. And apart from that, the only really downside is that it does not stop a Thrasios, but...
Yeah, I'd say it's almost a card that makes Thrasios better. If you're on the Thrasios deck and you're in that Thrasios mode where you're just trying to draw a couple cards every turn, all right, I'll just scry for land drops and try my best, and you'll probably win that game.
Yeah, very true, very true. But yeah, Narset's insane. It is one of the pieces, like we talked about with Smothering Tithe, that did help to originate the Opus Thief deck. So Then there's a couple other 3-mana ones. I'll quickly mention Gideon Blackblade. I know some of the mid-range sort of smash fests, some people are adopting it just because of the great rate it has. Ashiok, the 3-mana Ashiok from War of the Spark, is, once again, that card in particular is one of those that you really have to be able to protect that thing, because people get real pissed off when they can't search their library. So anything they have on the ground is coming at Ashiok.
I've thrown Tymnas into the Ashiok pile. Like, just good cards. Like, would I rather have a Tymna or be able to use my fetch lands? I guess I'd like to make some land drops.
Yeah, fair. Yeah, I mean, but on that same page, like, it demands that respect, because having a Stranglehold effect as a static ability on a Planeswalker is pretty amazing, along with some, albeit sorcery speed, graveyard hate.
Yeah, it's one of those cards that I have a friend who plays a Sisay deck, and it's okay. And it's one of those cards that the Sisay deck kind of makes it real. Because every time they've got 5 mana, you're like, I can't play my fetch lands, I can't play my tutors, I can't play a lot of graveyard shenanigans, because at any time, there it is, instant speed Ashiok.
One of the talking points we wanted to mention while we're on these 3-mana Planeswalkers is 3-mana Teferi, the new Teferi that came out in War of the Spark, and why it's so amazing in 60 card 1v1, and why it's so not where you want to be in cEDH. Brain, do you want to talk about that?
So the only time you want to play a 3-mana Teferi is when you're going to win this turn and you're 100% sure about it, or you're prepared to be the only person who casts counterspells for the rest of the game. Those are the only scenarios, really, I think, where it's acceptable. And most of the time, you don't want to be the person who's casting counterspells, because every counterspell you cast, you're down a card. And sure, your opponent who lost their spell, they're down a card too. But you've got 2 other opponents sitting on the sidelines pretty happy that their opponents are down 2 cards total. 3-mana Teferi puts all the responsibility on you, and in cEDH, generally, you want as little responsibility on you as possible. You just kind of want to sandbag and let things happen and try to get some advantage wherever you can. And Teferi does the exact opposite of that. He puts all the pressure on you. Once that card's down, you're the person who has to stop Flash Hulk. You're the person who has to stop the Food Chain deck. You're the person who has to stop the CST deck. You have to counter the Wheel of Fortune with a Smothering Tithe in play. All on you. Nobody wants to be in that spot.
Right. There's been so many games I've seen of cEDH where one person just plays a land, tutors, does nothing, and then has a person who's in front of them in priority order just like answer everything that's coming through. And then by the time everyone else has fought through the resources, the person who's cast maybe 3 spells this game can just win.
Yeah, you want to be that guy.
Yeah, you definitely do. Okay, and that's our sum up of War of the Spark. Moving on, the next giant set that came out was Modern Horizons, which was the first time anything like this has ever been done, because basically they skipped the standard format, so they pushed the power level of this set to extremes like they had never done before.
A lot of these cards were either too good for standard, or they were cards that have mechanics that aren't fun or don't make for good standard environments, but do have some impact on modern that they thought would be positive or at least interesting. Right. So for cEDH, the headline card for me is probably Collector Oof. And a lot of people are pretty surprised by that, I'm sure. But this 2-mana Oof is just absolutely absurd. It's a second copy of Null Rod, or a budget copy of Null Rod. It can get out super early and just hate on a whole bunch of people's resources. I love playing the card. You can tutor it up with all the creature tutors we talked about earlier, from Neoform to Finale of Gestation to Green Sun Zenith, and it's like one of the cards I'm having the most fun playing with right now.
Yeah, it's super powerful.
Especially on a creature, so you can just get in with it for Tymna beats, which sounds like a joke, but it totally happens. Another commander that came out in Modern Horizons, again, probably not the one you think we're mentioning, is Sisay. I've seen Sisay around. I made a list of, personally, which was Sisay Onion Queen. Sisay has some very powerful effects. Sadly, she's been kind of neutered by the wording that she has, which says the CMC of the legendary permanent she grabs has to be lower than her power, which is kind of frustrating. But besides that, the ability to put planeswalkers or stacks pieces or lands out at instant speed is pretty powerful, and it's definitely going to get more powerful as they keep printing broken planeswalkers like Oko, or Teferi, or Ashiok, or Narset.
Next up, we're going to talk about the big man on campus himself, Urza. Urza came out in Modern Horizons and basically just, I mean, Chainveil Teferi was dying, but then Urza said, hey, there's a new blue deck in town, GTFO.
What if Mono Blue could block Tymna?
Twice.
twice.
Yeah, Urza's pretty crazy. The fact that the deck can be shut down by like curse totem effects and yet still just beat that player to death with a giant construct token, or it's an artifact deck that can play through a collector roof and a null rod. Like,
I think that's the most threatening aspect
because
of
it's
the commander.
on Urza.
Is
Yeah,
the fact that null rod does almost nothing against him.
I know playing against it. I mean, the fact that he can just turn off orbs at instant speed too, like Static Orb and Winter Orb, and just, I mean, there's so many one-sided effects that Urza creates that really just make it a powerhouse in this format.
He's definitely the most powerful blue commander, or mono blue commander.
Yeah, I know I was one of the people when the card was first spoiled, and I was like, oh, well, there's the format. Good job, everybody. Pack it up. Obviously, it turned out to be a little less than that, but still, it's a very powerful card.
Another powerful commander that we mentioned a little bit earlier is the First Sliver. So the First Sliver is the replacement for the new Niv Mizzet Reborn that we mentioned just a little bit ago. He is basically the de facto food chain commander, except maybe Corvold or Prosh, depending on how hot of a take you want to have. The First Sliver lets you cast your whole deck infinitely, which means that your win condition acts a lot like a Thrasios or Tymna deck where you try to do Time Twister loops and cast certain spells infinitely. By using that win condition, the quality of the cards gets to stay very high. And so the downsides that traditionally the food chain decks have had, which is playing really bad cards so that you can win with your commander and infinite ETB or cast triggers, just doesn't really exist anymore. You basically get to play only good cards in a deck that can win on turn 1 or turn 2 with some real consistency. Another interesting thing that came to the format with Modern Horizons is the Horizon lands and the Talismans. Enemy color mana has been kind of rough in the format for a while. When I was building Feather, I had some real problems. And when I played Gitrog in the summer this year, I noticed how difficult it was to play the deck on a budget with many of the things you take for granted in the like blue-black or blue-white, the allied color combinations. You take a lot of cycles for granted in those colors, and so getting the Horizon lands and the Talismans feels like the format kind of homogenizing, but not necessarily in a bad way, in a way that feels kind of fair.
Right. Especially since last year the Allied colors all got the Battle Bond lands, them having these Horizon lands to sort of have their own version of the land they get exclusively really helps in this competitive environment.
Yeah, and the Horizon lands are pretty nuts in the consult decks that became popular this year.
Yep.
Being able to turn your lands into second or third or even fourth draw triggers in response to a removal spell is pretty powerful.
Right. Also, the fact that the black-green Nurturing Peatland, the fact that that goes in Gitrog is crazy.
Yeah, pay 1, sack a land, draw 2 cards is pretty nuts.
Yeah. One deck that has been sort of on the fringes for the past year since it was printed has been the Yuriko deck, Yuriko Tiger Shadow. And Modern Horizons brought a plethora of cards that were very good in that deck. Several changelings, including the Wandering Outcast, I believe it is called. It is the unblockable changeling.
The artifact changeling?
Universal Automaton. Yep. That, and it also got the Sprite, which is the Fairy Seer. That's the blue mana for a 1/1 flyer that scries 2, which is absolutely amazing when you curve that into Yuriko. So a lot of really amazing payoffs for that deck. And to top that all off, there were also new ninjas added this year. So I know not all of them are seeing play in the deck, but a number of them have been able to be slotted in, including the uncommon that lets you draw whenever a ninja hits your opponent. So now you're drawing multiple cards in that deck. And it definitely took it from, it's not, I wouldn't say it's a heavily viable deck, but it is significantly more than it was.
If someone posted a Yuriko list on the cEDH Facebook page, I would assume that they were playing a tuned cEDH list and not a bad ninja tribal deck.
Right.
I think that says a lot.
Yeah, I think that's a big upgrade from where it was. Another cycle that I haven't talked about yet is the Force cycle. Obviously all based on the card Force of Will, which is a defining card to Magic and especially the competitive formats. There were 5 forces all added. The 2 that are really seeing play, obviously the red one. No, I'm just kidding. The actual ones that are seeing play are the blue Force, the Force of Negation, and the green Force, the Force of Vigor. I've actually seen more of the green force than I have the blue in competitive EDH. I know a lot of heavy blue decks will definitely run Force of Will and Force of Negation, and Force of Negation is an acceptable budget substitute for Force of Will, but Force of Vigor I've seen in a lot of decks, and it does work.
Force of Vigor is probably the card that has created the most salt of any card in the format. And here's why. Some guy is doing degenerate stuff with a food chain or a freed from the real or some stacks piece. You know, we all know those kinds of people.
Oh, so me.
And I'm sitting here with a Mana Crypt or a Training Grounds, being a nice guy, playing my Thrasios, playing my Tymna.
Boo.
And they have the nerve to hit the food chain and they just strike down my Training Grounds for no good reason. I'm just being a nice guy, and they blow up one of my best card advantage engines that's just sitting there having a nice time. And I get so salty.
I've seen that card just absolutely destroy games. I do play in a meta. One of my local metas is one where I play against a ESON player almost exclusively every game, and the amount of times I've been like, oh, well, as long as he doesn't have Force of, oh, and he has it, and it's blown up 2 of the pieces locking him down. I was at a cEDH tournament recently, and I had a Hulk player locked under a Rest in Peace and a Grafdigger's Cage, and of course we had all thought he was completely out of the game until he ripped that right off the top. So, you know, it's the fact that it gets 2 things for free is crazy, because I think, honestly, it probably could have seen some play with 1.
I think the crazy thing is that Force of Will is like a 1 for 2. You lose a Force of Will and a blue card.
Yeah.
Force of Vigor is a 2 for 2.
Yeah.
You just toss some dork to the side, and you're just trading for 2 great cards that people put out and probably are getting them ahead of you. It's pretty nutty.
Yeah, and it's even crazier in green because in that late game you have all these little dorks in your hand that turn 1 are amazing, but late game they're literally useless.
Yeah.
Great. And the last talking point I wanted to address is sort of a personal one. I am someone who thinks Curse Totem is probably one of the best cards this great format we have here. Braden comes with the oof null rod side, and I'm coming from the Linvala Curse Totem side.
Hey, I love a good Linvala, don't get me wrong. As long as no one touches my Thrasios, we're fine.
Yeah, so I think Curse Totem's absolutely insane, and one of the cards that did come out in Modern Horizons was Tribute Mage, which is part of the Mage cycle. 3 mana, blue 2/2. And when it comes in, you can search for an artifact with converted mana cost 2. And I've been telling people for a while that if you're playing a Curse Totem deck and you're on the dramatic reversal line, that Tribute Mage can get you so much value. Not to mention, obviously, like, worst case scenario, those things are out of your deck. You can always get some Grim Monolith or something like that. But the fact that if you're running enough 2-drops, which I think a lot of people looked over this card and didn't even take the time to think about it, if you're running one of those decks that could play it, I think you should play it. And especially if you're playing in a meta with Thrasios and Urza and Yisan and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If you're playing in these metas where Curse Totem just shuts everyone the heck down, then it's worth considering. So
I think this is definitely like a Jeskai card.
Yes.
Where you aren't in black, you are in blue, you're reliant on the good blue infinite mana lines.
Yes.
But you're not in green.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, definitely. So, those decks like maybe even Elsa, Grand Arbiter, things like that, take a second look at that card, I think.
Maybe even the Esper Fairy Commander.
Alayla, yeah. Anyways, the next item on our list, we are done with Modern Horizons. We are moving on to the big summer ban this year for cEDH, the banning and unbanning announcement. That involved the banning of Paradox Engine, Iona, and the unbanning of Painter Servant. So, Braden, do you want to talk about that?
Sure. I remember the moment I found out about the Paradox Engine ban. It was a beautiful morning. I had just spent the night before dunking on people with Paradox Scepter and my Feather deck, and all of a sudden, the shot heard around the world, Paradox Engine's banned. Suddenly, several key decks in the format just poofed out of existence.
Yep.
There was the green-white Sisei deck, which tutored up legendary permanents and would play them, where they had a line where they could tap and untap their Sisei using Paradox Engine. There was the Arkham Dagsum deck, which used Paradox Engine to go infinite. Paradox Scepter Thrasios has to go full consult now, which is why it's called Consultation Scepter Thrasios now, which was a move that was already happening at the time, as many people know, but really pushed the change. I'm sure there's a lot of other decks. I mean, I mentioned Feather already.
Yeah, I was going to say Joyra really suffered.
Oh, yeah, Joyra.
Yeah.
Any deck that used artifact mana is now having to really rethink its situation. Because now there isn't this explosive artifact that just wins you the game the moment it resolves. And now you have to ask yourself, maybe I'm supposed to be on Seaborn Muse. Maybe I'm supposed to be on Dork Mana. Maybe I'm supposed to be doing something else. Paradox Engine was very, very powerful. And without it, a lot of decks they don't have an explosiveness that allows them to sit at the big kids table anymore, which is really sad.
Yeah, it's tough because you understand why it happened, but you also hear about the people who are like, just sleeved up my green-white Sisay deck, and what?
Yeah, so the argument I heard, which really made me not be a salty piece of shit about Paradox Engine, was the real problem is that a whole bunch of people didn't know how to play Paradox Engine.
Yeah.
It would make people sit 3 or 4 hours as they resolve their Paradox Engine triggers, and that's just not cool.
Mm-hmm.
That's not fun. That's not what Commander's supposed to be about.
Right.
Commander's supposed to be about having fun, and watching someone spin their wheels for a couple hours is not fun.
No.
Speaking of not having fun, Iona was also banned. Iona was a big fat angel that allowed you to name a color, and that spells of that color cannot be cast by your opponents. This card I feel less passionately about. It doesn't really contribute anything to our format, and it's generally a card that pub stompers use to make people sad.
Yep.
So I'm kind of okay with it being gone. I'm not happy that it sets a precedent of banning cards like that, but there already is a precedent of banning cards like that.
I am one of the few people to say I was exhilarated by that banning. Not just because I played against it all the time. As much as I love cEDH, I played and play a good amount of casual Commander, and the amount of times I would be like, you know what, guys, I'm not gonna hear your about repping a color. I'm gonna be playing my mono red decks till the day I die. And this was like Iona, and I go, okay, so I'm gonna go grab a drink. I'll see you guys in 20 minutes. So you know what? It's fine. I'm okay. It's gone. So the other half of this announcement was the Painter's Servant unban. Painter's Servant was banned for some god knows reason.
So the reason Painter's Servant was banned, I can tell you the reason. You know the card Una, Queen of the Fae?
Yes.
It was too strong with Una because you would always get your fairies if you named the correct color. I forget what you have to do with Queen.
Is this
Fae.
the inside knowledge that you're dropping on me right now?
Yes, that is what I've heard. That's 2011 forum post.
Ooh.
I'm pretty sure that I read.
Una, get out of here with that consistency on those fairies.
Yeah, I don't think it was Grindstone at all.
That's insane.
It might have been. That might have helped.
Yeah, probably
But-
didn't hurt. But, I mean, to a lot of people, Painter Servant should never have been on the ban list. The fact that the I Win combo, first of all, costs 5 mana, it's 2 separate cards, and it only kills a single player. Yeah, okay, you can't tell me that and then also just unban Protean Hulk, right?
Yeah, I feel like it has a lot of the same problems that Rest in Peace and Helm of Obedience have, where, sure, you killed one person, but now the table gets to go around, and
Yep.
they can interact with you. They can maybe steal your combo from you if they're playing the right cards. Or they might just be able to blow up your Rest in Peace, and now you killed the person that was holding someone else back.
Right.
I'd rather just kill the table, and there's a lot of ways to kill the table in this format.
Or you could play Grand Arbiter and play both of those win cons. Because there's not many others.
Yeah, that's probably the biggest problem with him, but we can talk about that some other time.
Yeah, sounds good. So moving on from the ban, we have a shorter topic with us. Core Set 2020. Why don't you start us off, Braden?
Okay, sometimes Wizards of the Coast, they get into their secret cabal, they get in a circle, and they pray to the color pie gods. And sometimes they answer. And sometimes cards like Veil of Summer get printed. I don't know who makes the rules. It might be Mark Rosewater. I'm not sure how he feels about green getting 1-mana Cryptic Commands, but I'm a big fan. Veil of Summer is completely busted. It's a counterspell that's banned in formats, which is just a ridiculous concept to me. I mean, it's not ridiculous that it's banned. It's
Yeah.
just ridiculous that they printed one so good.
Yeah.
Every cEDH player, when they saw this card, opened up a slot for Veil of Summer.
Yup. Yeah.
If it interacts super well with the decks of the time,
Mm-hmm.
it draws you a card for some reason. I've won the game with that draw trigger. I've done it. I've been like, all right, I guess in response to you killing my Jace, I'll play a Veil of Summer and win.
That's amazing.
So Veil of Summer's busted. Not sure how they could make it better without just giving it all the other abilities that Cryptic Command
Right.
has. It's a broken magic card.
It's legitimately, sometimes I'll listen to talks they have with Mark Rosewater about like his amazing in-depth thoughts on the color pie, and then they fucking print Veil of Summer.
If I remember correctly, there's like some types of sets he doesn't put as much of an eye
And
on.
apparently he just skipped over this one.
Maybe core sets are one of those.
Yeah.
They did an article about M20 and these colors cards because they haven't done them in quite a while. And they're actually very popular amongst people who play spikier formats. And they said that they were trying to create cards that would allow them to push and pull standard, and they just kicked whatever Veil Summer was trying to stop really hard down on the ground.
Veil of Summer in the 60 card was a failure because it was too good. But on the other hand, I've been playing a lot of 60 card, and cards like Aether Gust, that one specifically, Noxious Revival, they've all been really good cards that play well if you're smart about your meta. And I think they've been really brilliant for constructed play. So I
love these.
They messed up
cards.
once.
Veil of Summer is just too good. So speaking of absolutely busted format warping cards, we have Yarok. And, you may not know what peak, spiky, broken commanders look like, but this is it. Yarok doubles enter the battlefield effects for everything. You got a creature that enters the battlefield, double it. Got a land that enters the battlefield, double it. Enchantment that enters the battlefield, double it. Cobblepot has been working on a deck built around Yarok since at least GP Vegas, and every couple months I hear about upgrades for it, and I get more and more scared of this deck. Thankfully, I don't have to play against it. There's a guy who loves playing cards like the cards that Cobblepot plays. I think they're called like Storm Cauldron. Basically, Cobblepot's deck tries to bounce everyone's lands to their hand and then play all of his lands while his opponents just sit there dumbfounded. And I've played against lists like this, and it's no fun. I hate it. So I'm really happy I haven't seen a Yarok deck in the wild.
It's a specific niche, but it's in the best colors in the format, so I guess it does its thing.
It's really hard to make a bad Sultai commander. You don't even need an outlet. Eventually, you're just like, I'm on Sylvan Library, Dark Confidant, good cards, counter spells. I win.
All right, so the next legend we have is Kaikar Wind's Fury. The legendary 3/3 flying commander says whenever you cast a non-creature, you can make a 1/1 white spirit with flying. And it has the activated ability to sacrifice a spirit and add red mana. So this is a Divergent Transformations deck based around casting Divergent Transformation, flipping into the only 2 creatures in your deck. Brayden, do you want to go over those creatures?
Sure. So one of the creatures is Elsa of the Infinite. This allows you to win at instant speed because Elsa allows you to cast the top card of your library at instant speed if it's a non-creature permanent or non-creature card. Then the other card you get off of Divergent Transformations is Spellseeker. Spellseeker gets you an Enlightened Tutor, which allows you to put Sensei's Divine Top on top of your library. Now, at instant speed, you can cast the Sensei's Divine Top using the mana you got from casting Divergent Transformations to cast the top. If you activate top to draw a card, the top ends up back on top of your library, and you use the mana you got from casting the top to replay the top.
Right.
Now, I know that's a little complicated, but what the Sensei is allowing you to do is at instant speed, draw your whole deck. Now, you can use a few cards to play an Isochron Scepter, make infinite mana, maybe win with a Goblin Bombardment, something like that. You can even play your Mox Diamonds and Chrome Moxes off the top with Elsa at instant speed.
Which is a bit more complicated because that means you have to individually draw every card in your deck.
But being able to win the game at instant speed is very powerful, and it actually makes Kaikar much more competitive than a deck like Narset that's playing a much clunkier commander that can only win by, doing a whole bunch of messy stuff.
Right.
It also makes it a 1-card combo with Divergent Transformations, which means the downside that you usually get from playing Jeskai, which is having very few tutors. Instead of tutoring for 2 pieces, you just tutor for 1 piece.
And it's an instant sorcery, which is really easy to get in these colors. All right, so moving on from there, we have Commander 2019, the Commander Focus set for this year. I'll start things off. We had 3 commanders we're going to talk about. I'm going to talk about 2 of them. The first is a list I play personally, which is Elsa of the Infinite, the one we were just talking about with the Kaikar combo. Elsa is such an amazing value engine. I'm really enjoying that part of playing the deck. So it's the Jeskai deck based around getting a cost reducer for an artifact and Sensei's Divining Top in play at the same time. So with that, you play your Sensei's Top for free and then draw a card. And then because Elsa allows you to look at the top card of your library and cast it at instant speed, you can do that process all over again. Like we were saying with the Kaikar combo, you can then proceed to play all of your fast mana off the top of your deck and play the Isochron Scepter Dramatic Reversal loop, basically making it so that anytime you assemble top and reducer, you can win at instant speed. And it's pretty powerful because the deck doesn't appear to be doing anything until you win, because it's pretty cool because you play some mana rocks, you maybe play Elsa, and you're like, oh, I'm just getting a bit of value here, and then sometimes you're just like tutor, and all of these top of the deck tutors are no longer card disadvantage, which is a topic we can go into as far as some of the downsides of tutors in cEDH. But now suddenly you can play Personal Tutor and Enlightened Tutor and Mystical Tutor and have those cards as soon as you need them. I played in creature heavy meta sometimes where I can Mystical Tutor a Rolling Earthquake or a Pyroclasm to the top of my library at instant speed to deal with a board state.
Her also having prowess makes those type of board wipes where you do a certain amount of damage even more powerful,
right?
Because you can kind of scale how much damage you want to do up with the prowess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've run into that a couple times where I've been like, before I resolve this board wipe, I'm gonna hold priority and cast these 0 mana rocks from the top of my library. Yeah, so Elsa is just a very powerful commander, and it's been winning me a lot of games, so I'm a big fan. The next commander from the set is Anya Falconwrath. This madness focus commander is basically a turbo filtering deck. Instead of casting the madness cards like the commander deck basically was designed to do, this version just focuses hard on assembling the Animate Dead World Gorger combo, which, Braden, do you want to go into the combo more specifically?
Sure. When World Gorger enters the battlefield, it exiles your whole board, and then when it leaves the battlefield, those things come back, just like an Oblivion Ring. If you animate dead a World Gorger back from the graveyard, or Necromancy, or Dance of the Dead, those are all enchantments that bring creatures back from the graveyard. If you use those enchantments, once they leave the battlefield, the World Gorger also has to leave the battlefield. So you end up with an interesting loop where the World Gorger enters the battlefield, then exiles the Animate Dead that's keeping it alive, which kills it, which brings back the Animate Dead. It's a very fragile combo because if you remove the Animate Dead at the right time, you can exile their whole board permanently. But it's also very fast because it only takes 2 or 3 mana and a World Gorger in your graveyard and an Animate Dead in your hand.
Right.
Anya does that incredibly efficiently, and by playing like 30 Madness cards, you're playing a 60 card deck instead of a 100 card deck.
Right. Yeah, it's an interesting strategy. You know, if every deck could run 30 Cataxian Probes that don't do damage to you, I think they would.
Yes, you do end up with some problems where you might blood with mana.
Oh yeah.
Not be able to chain things off, but there's a few cards in the deck that help out with that, and so the deck, I wouldn't call it consistent,
no.
But you do the same thing quite a few times.
And I think it is the most consistent Rakdos deck in the format right now.
I agree. The next commander we wanted to talk about was Cryptic, which is the mono black commander from the Commander 2019 precons. This commander allows you to spend black mana as if it was Phyrexian mana. So instead of paying a black, you can pay 2 life, which is incredibly powerful. Now, because you're in mono black, you have access to many tutors, you have access to many combos like Bolas's Citadel, Sensei's Divining Top is probably the most popular one. These combos are quite consistent. However, because you're a mono black, you lack the protection and some of the ability to put the pieces back together after some interaction. Additionally, if your opponents are playing cards like Force Negation that exile pieces, you don't really have a way of getting anything back, and there isn't enough redundancy to be able to win after some type of interaction like that. The only other commander that's mono black though that is as powerful as Crick is probably the mono black cEDH deck that tries to tutor for ad nauseum and cast it and draw most of the deck. I think that deck is probably stronger than Crick, although that's a personal opinion. I don't have very much experience with both decks.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you, have you played against Crick yet?
I have. I'm not very impressed by it, but at the same time, you're in mono black, so you're kind of limited.
Yeah, black's interaction is like the tutors are the best part of black. I would say the interaction is wanting.
Yeah, even in black red, like with Anya, you get Pyroblast and Burnout and Red Elemental Blast, and just those 3 pieces of removal, especially if you're reducing the size of your deck by using Madness cards, is enough to keep you in the game and maybe be able to interact with key spells like Flash or Rhystic Study or maybe a Verity Circle or something like that. The 4th card we want to talk about isn't exactly a commander, but it might be the best card from the entire year. I certainly think so. It's Dockside Extortionist. Dockside Extortionist is a 2-mana goblin pirate, I think.
Yeah, I think it is.
You have to check up on that one. When it enters the battlefield, you create treasures equal to the number of artifacts and enchantments your opponents control. A treasure is basically a lotus petal. It's an artifact you can tap to sack, create 1 mana of any color. The interesting thing about Dockside Extortionist is that it's an incredibly efficient ritual while simultaneously being an incredibly efficient and useful combo piece. Dockside Extortionist, combined with some effect that allows you to return a creature to your hand and then replay it, creates infinite mana if your opponents have the correct number of artifacts and enchantments. Usually 4 or 5 mana is required for the combo, so 5 or 6 mana is required to go infinite and create infinite amounts of treasures. The 2 cards that people typically use for these combos is Baron Master Wizard and Temur Sabertooth. Both of these cards interact differently with each other. Sabertooth can live through more removal and might be more useful in a deck like Yisan, while Baron Master Wizard is able to bounce your opponent's creatures by sacking your own permanents. This is kind of useful if you're expecting to see cards like Collector Oof, Niv Mizzet Perrin, which is a card you don't want to interact with by casting spells, so Baron is actually very useful against something like that. Or a Gilded Drake if you want to bounce your Gilded Drake back to your hand to reset it. Temur Sabertooth is green though, which means you can get it off of a green Sun Zenith, while Baron Master Wizard is blue, which means you can pitch it to Force the Will. So you just have to evaluate both cards to see how one is better than the other, but both are pretty excellent.
Another interesting thing about looking at these Dockside lines is that they're still so new, and a lot of people actually really don't know about them. I know we're going to talk about a list later that's trying to maximize that interaction, but I was on some Discords earlier last week, and people were like, hey, I saw this new brew my friend had where he was playing Dockside and Baron Master Wizard. And I was like, well, not a brew. I think people have a lot to learn about these lines, and I think they have a lot of potential.
I do too. I should note that Baron Master Wizard only costs 3 mana, and Sabertooth costs 4 mana, which means both fit inside of a Flash Hulk pile. A lot of people want to play these cards together in Flash Hulk. I personally don't think that's a very good idea, with the exception of possibly Baron. With Sabertooth and Dockside, you're just tutoring for 2 cards. So instead of tutoring for Flash and Hulk, maybe you should just be tutoring for Temur Sabertooth and Dockside Extortionist. That's personally how I see it. With Baron Master Wizard, by being 3 mana, you can actually stick in an extra card into that Hulk pile, like a Sylvan Safekeeper, which will help protect your combo while you're going off.
Interesting.
Or maybe like a Hapless Researcher or something. Something that allows you to have some effect that makes the Hulk pile better than just those 2 cards that it takes.
Yeah, having that extra slot in a Hulk pile, as any Hulk player will tell you, is pretty integral.
It is important to note that you can play both of these cards in a Hulk deck, like Kenrith Hulk, and not intend for them to be hulked together, but maybe one Hulk pile you have is no longer in your deck, and now you can, Hulk for Baron, Master Wizards, and Dockside Extortionist, and go off at sorcery speed. Most Hulk piles you want to win at instant speed, but having them as a backup isn't a bad idea.
Yeah, and going off of that, I think a lot of people have sort of looked at this loop as a main win condition, and I think relying on your opponent's board state to have at least 5 artifacts or enchantments, although it is realistic in the format, it shouldn't depend on your opponents for the win. So I completely agree with what you're saying about having this as sort of a backup.
The card quality is incredibly high in these cards. If you look at Isochron Scepter and Dramatic Reversal is worse than Dockside Extortionist as like a ritual, while Isochron Scepter, I think, is worse than Baron Master Wizard.
Ooh, hot take.
I don't like Isochron Scepter as just a generic value card. I've never been very successful with it. And Baron Master Wizard can interact with your opponent's Hulk lines. Worst comes to worst, just bounce their Lab Maniac. If you bounce the Narcomoeba to their hand in the middle of Shuffle Hulk, you can really cause some problems in their combo. So I much prefer Baron Master Wizard to Isochron Scepter, but that's a pretty hot take.
It's spicy. Great. So we are all set with Commander 2019. There are very few cards that really made our list this year, but who knows? Later down the line, we could find a Divergent Transformations style card that ends up warping into something better. But as for right now, just have those 4. Let's move on to either, depending on who you ask, one of the best things or worst things to happen to Magic in a long time. Throne of Eldraine.
Yeah. That's certainly true. All right, so I'm going to start off with some fringe stuff and move closer and closer into the world of normalcy. Wishclaw Talisman. Wishclaw Talisman is a artifact that enters the battlefield with 3 counters on it. You tap it and remove a counter to tutor a card and put it into your hand. But when you do this, an opponent gains control of the Wishclaw Talisman. With a commander like Aminatou that allows you to blink permanents you own, but not necessarily control, you can reset the Wishclaw Talisman every turn, basically giving you a demonic tutor to play every turn. And if you can't win very quickly with that, probably should try doing something else. Aminatou specifically will probably be tutoring for some of its infinite blink pieces or some of its card advantage engines that work when you blink cards.
Yeah, I was going to say, I took a pretty deep dive into the Amanatu discords and primers pretty recently, and a lot of them talk about these cards like Wishclaw Talisman and a card we're going to talk about later, and one from Commander 2020, Scheming Symmetry. These cards that, in general, are kind of bad because they, for example, Wishclaw, allow both you and an opponent to tutor, but they have an entire section about how to use these cards not only with Amanatu to break the parity on them, but also certain circumstances in cEDH where you need to give someone a tutor to stop someone else. But it's interesting.
If you make someone promise to get a Grafdigger's Cage, and you know there's a Hulk player putting the pieces together, and you trust them to actually get the Grafdigger's Cage, it might be worth it to play some of those bad cards that can be good in a deck like Amanatu. Another card that I've seen floating around in the cEDH pods is Return of the Wild Speaker. Return of the Wild Speaker is an instant that allows you to choose one of two options. The first, draw cards equal to the greatest power amongst non-human creatures you control, or non-human creatures you control get +3/+3 until end of turn. The deck I see playing this the most is Selvala. Selvala is a commander that allows you to play these really big creatures that have huge drawbacks and take advantage of their power and toughness to get ahead in certain resources like card advantage or mana. A lot of times you'll be pumping Selvala or another creature to get its power as high as possible to make tons of mana with her ability, and Return of the Wild Speaker is something you can spend a lot of that mana on to refill your hand after playing some pump spells or some weird creatures that have huge drawbacks that you don't really care about. You'll probably see that card around if you ever play against a Selvala deck or a lot of cards like it. Life's Legacy comes to mind.
Yep.
The card's very powerful. Another card that I've been seeing people testing with is Emry, Worker of the Lock. Emry is a 3-mana 1/2 for 2 and a blue that allows you to tap so that you can cast target artifact card in your graveyard. If you have cards like Dramatic Reversal and Icecrown Scepter or some weird cards from Battle Bond, you can actually go infinite with Emry by sacking and replaying the same artifacts over and over again and create an infinite amount of some resource.
Wait, are they playing Chakram Retriever?
Yes, they are. That's the card. Sorry. It's a very obscure Magic
No,
card.
I know. I just always looked at that card and said, they're going to break this someday.
Yeah, well, they're trying. I'm not a big fan of Emry, but she does do some scary stuff, and you have to respect her while she's at the table. The problem is that when people do respect her, she loses.
She also does suffer from the double hate piece aspect where she will die
Yes.
to Curse Totem and Null Rod.
Yes, a huge problem that a lot of decks have in the format is if they lose to two of the key hate pieces, Null Rod and Curse Totem, they just don't make sense, really.
Right.
If you can't play one or the other and you lose to both, you're pretty screwed, I'd say.
Yeah.
Now, the next card in the order of hot takes is Faber Welder. Faber Welder is...
Is this a hot take anymore?
I'm not sure. Every once in a while, someone will see me playing it, and they'll be like, really?
Wow, because that blows my mind. Because everyone I know who's talked about this card is like, oh, it's in now. Like, this is the new hotness.
Well, I guess I might be behind. But Faber Welder is a 3-mana creature that taps for each color amongst permanents you control. So if you have a Thrasios out, it taps for white, green, and blue because it's white and green, and Thrasios is green and blue. It also has power and toughness equal to the number of colors you control. So in that situation where you have a Faber Welder and a Thrasios, it's a 3/3. This card goes infinite with Freed from the Real, just like Bloomtender, as it's basically the same ability. It's also a lot cheaper in terms of dollars and cents. Bloomtender is a very expensive Magic card.
Yeah.
I've been playing this a lot lately in my medium green deck. It's one of the best cards I can get off of Green Sun Zenith. It goes infinite with Freed from the Real, and it gets in with Tymna, and it taps to draw a card with Thrasios. So it's quite powerful. I'm not sure if it's widely accepted as being worth it because the 3-man investment is pretty high, but I found it to be very playable.
Yeah, and in green decks where you know you're going to at least get some sort of ramp 95% of the time on turn 1, I think the 3-man is a little easier.
For sure. You can also mulligan the hands where it doesn't work out.
Yeah.
I don't think people mulligan aggressively enough, to be honest.
No, I completely agree.
Now, moving in on cards that everyone likes, Oakum Adversary. Oakum Adversary pretends to be a green elf for 1 and a green that's a 2/3 with Death Touch and draws a card whenever it deals damage. Now, what it actually is an elf for 3 and a green with Death Touch that draws a card when it deals damage. But it has a special ability that says it costs 2 less whenever your opponent has a green card in play, which is basically always. So, it's a lot like a green Bob, which is why people lovingly call it Grob. It's very powerful. It gets through like cards like the Gitrog monster, sometimes Urza. People don't want to lose their Constructor, they don't want to lose their Urza. It gets 2 cards when there's a Tymna in play. It also does interesting things where they can't really double block it.
Yeah, that ends bad.
It's very powerful. It's one of the best green creatures they've made for cEDH, although it probably wasn't made for cEDH.
Oh yeah, it's 100% a limited card.
But it's nuts in our format,
so
so we're jamming it. Now, the second to last card I'm going to be talking about is Corvold. Corvold is the brand spanking new food chain commander for 2019. The second/third. When it enters the battlefield, you must sacrifice a permanent, but whenever you sacrifice a permanent, you draw a card and put a counter on him. If you sack a permanent like a fetch land, you get to draw a card, kind of like the Gitrog monster. When he attacks, you also have to sack a permanent, which lets you draw a card each turn off of him. If you have a card called Squee the Immortal, and you've made infinite mana with him in Food Chain, you can replay your commander infinitely, sack the Squee, cast him back from the graveyard, and now you can just draw your whole deck. Additionally, he combos with Dockside Extortionist, because whenever you crack a treasure for mana, you're going to draw a card because you've sacrificed a permanent. So, if you play the Temur Sabertooth Dockside Extortionist line, you can now make infinite mana and draw your whole deck. You play cards like Goblin Bombardment that allow you to sack a creature to deal damage. You just sack your commander infinitely since you have infinite mana, and now you've won the game. He's very powerful, very fast, very consistent. He's in green and black, which are 2 of the best colors in all of Commander. He's in red, so he gets some very interesting cards like Squee. I think Corvold might be one of the decks that just keeps getting better for the next few years.
Yeah.
They keep printing fetch lands. He's just going to keep getting better, I guess.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people say that he's completely usurped Prosh for the Jund spot.
Oh, absolutely. I don't even think it's close.
Yeah.
And the fact that the Dockside Extortionist is a ritual that also draws you cards is just absurd.
It is. It's insane.
2 mana, ritual, and draw 5. It's like an ad nauseum, but better. And finally, the last card I'm going to be talking about is Oko. Oko is Broko, as they say. Oko is a 3-mana planeswalker that allows you to +2 to create a food token, +1 to turn a creature or artifact into a 3/3 elk, or -5 to replace an artifact or creature you control with another artifact or creature with power 3 or less. Oko is like a Gilded Drake attached to a life gain spell attached to a beast within. He may be the only playable planeswalker that isn't like Narset or Jace with those static abilities they have in the entire format. I don't think Teferi is playable. I don't think Jace the Mind Sculptor is playable. None of those cards really create the kind of advantage that you need to be creating to make it worth your slot and your mana cost. But Oko, he just answers a threat every turn, and he gets you ahead very quickly. The problem I've had with Oko in the format, which is why I'm not currently running him in my decks, is that I found he doesn't actually progress the game plan, and he doesn't really protect your game plan either. So the problem I've run into is I just keep turning Gitrog into a 3/3 or turning my opponent's stacks pieces into 3/3 elk, but I'm not actually progressing my own game plan in a meaningful way, and he isn't as good as a Necropotence or a Counterspell. So that's the problem I've had with him. And I think that's the problem that a lot of Planeswalkers are going to have in the format. Anytime a Planeswalker is too good on the battlefield, he's just going to die to a Crom or a Gitrog monster. I had a few problems with Oko, but generally, if you are going to play a Planeswalker, it better be Oko. Or something like Jace and Narset, which have those static abilities, which make them almost completely different cards.
Yeah.
I'm now going to hand it off to Ian, who is going to be covering the other half of the cards we're going to be talking about today, just from Throne of Eldraine, by the way.
Yeah, Eldraine gave us a lot of stuff, which is why it's a push set. Speaking of fringe cards to really start us off, I'm going to talk about Deafening Silence. So this is a card that I think everyone in cEDH looked at and said, wow, that is a powerful effect for only a single mana. And it's hard to argue with it. So Deafening Silence says that each player may only cast 1 non-creature spell each turn. So everyone looked at that and said, oh, like, hey, there's another rule of law effect. That's great. For 1 mana, insane. The problem is you need to be playing a white creature deck. A lot of the good white decks kind of running around right now are non-creature focused, I would say. Decks that would want to jam this, especially Stacks decks, because you play Rule of Law effects in Stacks decks. The only place I think Deafening Silence is really going to see play is in more creature focused decks in white, which that's not a lot of decks in this format.
Not a lot of good decks.
No, not a lot. Yeah, it's a lot of fringe strategies in that spot.
Another problem with Deafening Silence is that if you play a Deafening Silence and a counter battle happens, as small as they sometimes get, for example, you play a Collector Oof, right? And your opponent decides they want to counter the Oof, so their rocks are still active. And your other opponent number 2, decides to protect your Oof with their own counterspell. The third opponent now sees that, wow, 2 players are down on counterspells because they can't cast any more non-creature spells this turn, and the other one just tapped out for a Collector Oof. I'm going to cast Flash.
Yeah.
And that player is probably going to win.
Game over.
That's the problem a lot of these rule of law effects have, is they don't really respect Flash, and they make it very difficult for your opponents to also respect Flash.
Mm-hmm.
And so kind of make these cards almost unplayable, unless in your meta nobody is winning at instant speed.
Yeah, that's the crazy thing about Flash. And I think with Flash out of the format, rule of law effects become a lot better, but it's here to stay at the moment. So
yeah, I agree.
So the next one I have on my list is Chulainn, Teller of Tales. This commander says whenever you cast a creature spell, you get to ramp a land, and you also get to draw a card, which is pretty amazing value for just casting like an Elvish Mystic per se. So a lot of people are playing with blinds with the card Allurin, which says you can cast spells with CMC 3 or less instant speed and for free.
Another option is Food Chain, because if you just cast the creatures over and over again, you can play every card in your deck by just drawing them with Chulainn and playing your lands so you can pay for them if they're non-creature spells.
Right. I've heard with some people messing with some more janky Intruder Alarm combos, but I think the Allurin Food Chain stuff is where a lot of people are focusing. The issue I've seen with this commander is that it takes a lot of setup to really get it going, and it doesn't really have a hard win.
Additionally, Gilded Drake is such a powerful card in the format that playing a 5-mana commander and passing the turn just isn't very cool.
It's rough. It's rough.
Now you've lost your commander for quite a while.
Yeah, as I said, it's a commander that has a lot of contradictions to it, and it feels like it's another commander that scoops to a Curse Totem.
Yeah, the Gitrog monster has similar problems, but the speed you get from being able to play cards like Ad Nauseam and Dark Ritual and Culling the Weak kind of make up for that.
Yeah.
You don't really get that in Banned.
Right. Gitrog has a sort of efficiency to it that Chulainn seems to be lacking. Another card we wanted to talk about in this sort of vein of good but not having a home right now is Hushbringer, a card that I personally am a big fan of. I think it is one of the best stacks creatures printed in a very long time. It is a 1/2 flying with lifelink. Hushbringer says creatures entering or dying do not cause abilities to trigger, which is insane that one card can shut down Hulk decks so aggressively. The problem is just bear decks right now and their kind of placement in the meta.
I think you'd just rather be on Craft Digger's Cage, sadly.
Yeah.
But we're going to see more cards like Hushbringer, and I think eventually they'll get it right.
Yeah. I agree. So the next card we're talking about is Mystic Sanctuary. Mystic Sanctuary is a new land from Throne of Eldraine that allows you, if you have 3 or more other islands, to put an instant or sorcery on top of your deck from your graveyard.
The crazy thing about that is that it's an island.
Yeah.
So you can fetch it off any of your fetch lands that fetch for any type of non-basic island.
Right.
So it could be an instant speed Noxious Revival in mono blue or just green blue or blue red decks.
Yeah.
It's insane.
Definitely. I know Anamatu decks are looking to shift their mana base actually just to support Anamatu being able to flicker Mystic Sanctuary each turn.
The Narumea decks, which is like a pretty fringe deck, but they're playing Mystic Sanctuary too because it allows them to regrowth their Ghostly Flicker so that they can draw the card and then go off at instant speed after they failed to combo off the first time.
Right. And a crazy thing that it also allows to exist is the original Kefnet, the Kefnet the Mindful. It allows you to basically go on an infinite turn loop with that Kefnet because Kefnet says for 4 mana you can draw a card and you may bounce a land back to your hand. So it allows you to pick up the Mystic Sanctuary each turn, playing it again, and therefore taking a time warp effect and putting it back on the top of your library so you can draw it again for that next turn.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. I know a lot of people are playing around with that Sick Robot from the Into the North podcast, and I were talking the other day about hybrid polymorph taking turns deck that he's been working on with 3 mana Kefnet.
It's also very good in those decks that are like relying on those future sight effects.
Right.
Allows you to put an instant or sorcery on top and maybe even play it at instant speed.
Right. Definitely something that I think as the format goes on, a lot of decks will be at least trying to see how well their mana base can stretch into it. And the final card I have here from Throne of Eldraine is Drown in the Loch. Drown in the Loch is a blue and a black for not a counter spell and not just a removal spell. It's both in one. So Depending on the amount of cards in the opponent's graveyard, whose spell you're either targeting or whose creature you're targeting, you can either counter a spell on the stack or can destroy a creature. So say Braden has 5 cards in his graveyard and I can kill anything on his field for mana cost 5 or less, or I can counter any spell with CMC 5 or less.
Oh no, my Seaborn Muse.
Yeah. This spell is amazing in a format that's just full of fetch lands.
People love casting spells. People love their graveyards. Drawing the Lock punishes it.
The amount of turn ones I've seen go Gitaxian Probe, fetch land, Mox Diamond. Oh look, there's already 3 things in my graveyard. And that's before you've really cast a spell.
Your Mystic Remora eventually have to stop paying for it.
Tutors.
Yeah, tutor, a quick counterspell.
One counterspell war turns this card into 0 restrictions, I think.
I'm currently not running it in one of my decks because I'm on Rest in Peace, but I'm not even sure that's correct.
It's a very powerful card.
It's that good.
So one last card we want to talk about for Throne of Eldraine. Braden, you actually had a bit of a part in popularizing a version of this deck.
I'm not so sure about that, but I came up with Dockside Consultation or Kenrith Dockside Consultation, something like that. Basically just a list that's playing the Dockside loops plus Consultation plus Kenrith, trying to generate a ton of value and get ahead on board. Use cards like Training Grounds to make Kenrith's abilities cheaper so they're easier to go off. Kenrith's a very interesting commander. The more I've played him, the more that 5 mana ability to reanimate a creature from anyone's graveyard and put it under their owner's control has become more and more interesting to me. It allows you to play a Razaketh for 5 mana, which doesn't seem ridiculous, but an instant speed Razaketh for 5 mana off of an Entomb, or maybe someone milling you or you milling yourself, has been very impressive. And it's definitely something that needs to be explored more. I think if the Reanimator archetype exists in 2020, it's going to be because of cards like Kenrith, or maybe because of cards like Corvold, but it's going to be on the back of these red Dockside Extortionist decks that are creating tons of value by using their reanimation spells as rituals and combo pieces.
Speaking of Dockside and Kenrith, there's some talk about people playing a sack outlet and using Dockside Kenrith as a way to generate infinite mana.
Yeah, sure. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is there's a spell that costs 5 mana that has buyback and does the exact same thing as Kenrith. It reanimates a creature, and if you pay its buyback costs, it goes back into your hand. Then you sack the Dockside, reanimate it. So maybe if there's a Cursed Totem out or something,
right,
you can still make infinite mana. There's a whole bunch of ways to do it. Kenrith's very powerful. Those other abilities are all useful sometimes. Sometimes the game goes grindy. You just need to gain 10 life every turn, and Kenrith's there to do it.
Yeah.
My biggest problem with Kenrith is the 5 mana paywall. It's almost impossible to get through. If you're trying to play a grindy deck with value cards, you can't just like ritual out a 5 mana commander like you can in Gitrog.
Right.
You're trying to play good cards. And so you can't just throw your cards into the wind and like go down to 2 cards in hand on turn 2 or turn 3 to get a Kenrith that someone's probably just going to Gilded Drake.
That's fair. I've also seen the fringe application with Kenrith on the field where anyone playing World Gorger loops actually can't put that in the graveyard with Kenrith out because he can reanimate World Gorgers without the animate dead loop, therefore causing people to have their whole board exiled.
Yeah, I've also seen people cast like Flash Hulk. Well, I've done this. My opponent cast Flash Hulk, I reanimate an Aven Mind Sensor in response.
Oof, nice.
Or someone's about to storm off, I reanimate an Eidolon of Rhetoric, which is a Rule of Law effect on a creature.
Yeah.
So Kenrith's ability has some very niche effects. Sometimes it's scary because you're giving your opponents the cards they want to have back in their hand and
right,
or on the battlefield. Another thing we haven't mentioned about him yet is the fact that because he's a win condition on the stick. So like usually you need a Time Twister, which can double as like a win condition and a draw effect. Kenrith is a draw effect, but he's also a win condition because if you have infinite mana, you can just force your opponents to draw 1 billion cards and die. If they try to interact with you, you just have them draw another 1 billion cards. If they try to interact with you again, another 1 billion cards. Eventually, you can just kill them in response to almost anything they can do, all from the command zone, which is very powerful. You don't have to worry about Twister loops or having your silence exiled and accidentally getting really unlucky. Nah, he just gets the job done on his own.
Yeah. Cool. So that is all of Throne of Eldraine. I know there's a lot to process there, but it was a big set for Magic and especially for cEDH. So we did notice some trends over 2019, and we wanted to take a step back and really look at these trends and talk about them for 2019. The first is the prevalence of brand new mono blue commanders. As far as 2019 is concerned, with the printing of new cards, we actually got a lot of really new stuff. So the first one is, as we just talked about with Mystic Sanctuary, 3 mana Kefnet. That became sort of a deck that people are now experimenting with because of Mystic Sanctuary. Those lines are really bringing it into the notion of viability. Whether it's actually going to get there is still to be seen. The second Kefnet is also viable, God Eternal Kefnet. With Scroll Rack and things of that nature, you can use that Kefnet's ability to start taking extra turns, and being able to replace the top card of your library allows you to go infinite with turns, which is pretty cool. Obviously, Urza was a huge mono blue get this year. Fibblethip, although a meme dream, is still pretty new, and Emery, like we talked about. So mono blue got a real shot in the arm this year, and it looks like a trend that might continue going forward.
Yeah, mono blue is very powerful, has some of the best cards from the entire history of Magic. Does have some problems though, specifically tutors and mana.
Yep.
However, they do have some of the best hate cards in the format, or interactions with hate cards. Urza's able to tap cards like Winter Orb or Trinisphere or Static Orb. Kefnet's able to bounce lands, so I'm sure there's a few effects that it's able to break parity on there. Kefnet doesn't have to. Mono Blue definitely has some of the most interesting commanders that exist today, and definitely some of the most powerful ones, so I'm excited to see how that goes in the future.
Yeah, the ones we talked about are all interesting in their own sort of alley, and a couple cards could push them all into a really competitive scene. Urza obviously already being there.
The next trend that I noticed personally was the shift towards consultation and grindy games. With the printing of the new Jace and the development of the Flash meta kind of reaching its, logical conclusion, I think you saw a lot of the format getting very slow, very grindy, people holding up mana, people playing value engines and protecting them. And we saw decks like CST, Consultation Kess, the Food Chain decks, and Opus Thief all switching towards consultation lines. It seems like it's the de facto combo for the format right now. If you're in blue-black, there really isn't a reason not to play Consult. And if you're in other colors, you have to ask yourself, what am I doing that's better than that? Because sandbagging, not playing any cards, and just kind of growing your value over the course of the game seems to be the best game plan. And if you're not doing that, you do have to ask yourself, why am I not doing that?
It's also so few slots that you have to devote to that win con.
It's like 3 to 4.
Right.
It only asks of you, if you're on Tainted Pact, which you don't even have to be on, it asks you to play 1 of every card. So 2 of every basic max because of snow basics.
Right.
But even then, that's somewhere between 4 and 8 basics usually, maybe 10 basics. And usually you only want to run 1 or 2. So it seems like it's not a big ask.
No, not at all.
Now, we just mentioned kind of like the logical conclusion of the Flash meta, but there were actually a lot of really interesting developments to the Flash Hulk line this year. The Sacred Hulk, the Shuffle Hulk, the Sigil Hulk, and the Dockside Hulk lines, and the Druid Graph Mage pile all basically came out this year. So there was Breakfast, and there was like the Hermit Druid Hulk decks. That was one category. And now there are the Shuffle, the Sacred, the Sigils, the Docksides, the Druid and Graph Mage Hulk piles. Those all exist now. And so each Hulk deck, which may be using the same commanders, with the exception of Druid and Graph Mage usually, and Dockside, most Hulk decks are using the same commanders, and the way they attack the game is generally very different. And so that's part of the power of Hulk right now, is that if you're playing Thrasios and Tymna, and you're on Hulk, you're not really telling your opponents anything. They don't really know what you're doing. They don't know how you're going to be trying to attack the game. They don't know which stacks pieces are good or bad against you. And if you're on a deck like Sacred Hulk, there's really nothing they can do because you win through Grafdigger's Cage almost always because the Hulk plan isn't even necessarily plan A all the time. Very impressive how much the format has changed in the last year.
Yeah, definitely.
To see how Hulk is just completely different than it was a year ago. I am not sure if Shuffle was invented this year, but the primer was released this year. And I know in January of this year, I didn't know what Shuffle Hulk meant, so it's interesting to see.
And definitely bringing up a point there that I'd love to dive into in a later episode, the idea of when you look at a Thrasios Tymna deck across the table, not only do you not know what they're on, but like even if you identify they're on Hulk, you still don't know what they're on.
It's a huge advantage that you just don't know about. You don't notice it really.
Right.
All right, so the next thing I wanted to talk about is Crom. I don't know about you guys, all out there, the cEDH community, those getting into cEDH, but Crom was a big fat loser till this year. Now you have all these cool cards in white and in red, so there's all these incentives to play these decks that aren't necessarily Thrasios and Tymna. I mean, you get to play white cards in Thrasios and Tymna, but you need wheels to go with your Smothering Tithe. So now you're kind of incentivized to be in red, so you get Wheel of Fortune. Now you're no longer in Thrasios and Tymna. Now you're in Crom and Tymna. So I think it's kind of interesting to see how the deck has developed over the last year. Or it might be a couple years now, but Crom is definitely not the joke that he was when he came out in 2016.
Yeah.
I mean, if you just look at Thrasios Crom, that's a pretty new combination. Dockside has really pushed that deck into the forefront, and now you have a deck that is using multiple infinite mana combos. All of the pieces in those combos are highly effective, and they can play a variety of hate cards, from Pyroclasm effects to Grafdigger's Cage to Null Rod if they want. Probably not really, though. And you have Crom, who's just a great card advantage engine when you need red, not white, or you need red, not green.
Yeah, it's interesting how the format has kind of done this weird 180 to now we're at the basics of the game Magic itself, and this 4/4 flyer is suddenly relevant.
He totally gets there. He kills people.
Yeah.
I've died to him so many times. I played Kenrith for the life gain at first, because I was dying to Crom beats.
That is a story I've heard before. Yeah, not just from you, but a good amount of people.
Crom's excellent. I think he's totally underrated by people who don't pay extremely close attention to the format, because, you know, when everyone thinks of cEDH, they think of Thrasios and Tymna.
Right.
They don't necessarily think of Tymna Crom or Thrasios Crom.
Yeah.
But he is just so efficient, and he draws so many cards because your opponents don't respect him. Kind of like Mystic Remora or Rhystic Study. He has that effect that says if your opponent casts 2 spells in a turn, you draw a card. So very powerful, very big. He's a chunky boy. Good year for Crom.
Yeah. Funny story. I was at Command Fest DC. You weren't there at the time, but I was talking with a group of people who were talking with Stibbs, and he was like, so how do you guys feel about commander damage? And they were like, oh, it's completely irrelevant, except there is Crom. And that was kind of the sticking point for that conversation.
Yeah, Crom gets there sometimes. So does Kenrith. Kenrith can
Yeah.
pump himself, so...
He gives himself trample, too.
Oh, yeah, and haste.
Oh, Kenrith.
I've given my opponent... my opponent's Deathrite Shaman haste before to stop a Gitrog player from going off. That's some top tier plays, isn't it?
If I've learned anything talking about Kenrith, it's a pain to get him on the board, but when he does, he just breaks the game wide open.
Yeah, I mean, you can literally reanimate your opponent's Deathrite Shaman and then give it haste to stop a Gitrog player if you have to.
Yeah, wow.
It's just nuts.
Yep.
He's very powerful. One more thing, one more trend, one more little tidbit I've noticed is the mid-range Thrasios decks. These decks are just playing tons of value engines, and I just want to give them a little shout out because this is the kind of Magic I enjoy. So there's Sick Robot Cinnamon Toast Crunch, which I think he's described as a deck where he just played every draw engine that exists. I think that was how he built the deck. I love it. It's very cool. It inspired me to buy a Guy's Cradle for my own deck that I've been working on, and that card is just so good. And then there's the deck I'm working on, which is pretty different because I don't play Grafdigger's Cage, and I play some other weird cards because of that. Medium Green Consult. That's a brew I've been working on. Very few people are playing it. No one's playing it, really. And we just play Seedborn Muse until we win. That's my deck, and that's a lot of fun. I love Seedborn Muse.
Fair enough.
I think we all play Magic just so we can play Seedborn Muse sometimes, right? Or is that just me?
It might just be you.
That's fair.
There's a lot of people out there who wish it was Prophet of Crufix.
Oh, that'd be so good. Or both.
Or both, yeah, or both.
Do you imagine Seedborn Muse and Prophet of Crufix?
I'd really rather not.
All right, so I wanted to play a little game where me and Ian would say what our favorite things of the year were. So we're just going to go these pretty quickly because we're reaching the end of the episode. So the first one is Commander. My favorite Commander of the year is probably Korvold. He's just so fast and he's so cool. He's like Jund Gitrog, but he also plays Dockside Extortionist because he's just so cool. And like, I feel like he wears sunglasses. I probably should get an altar of him wearing sunglasses.
Yeah, it sounds like a chill dude.
I got attacked for 12 the turn after a Korvold came into play, and then I died to commander damage from him the next turn.
Damn.
I don't own Korvold, but he's just so cool. He's just my favorite.
Yeah, he's a pretty cool dude. I wrote down my favorite here as Elsa because, one, I've been on the deck for a bit, and it's amazing. The Discord's really active, so I love chatting with them. Flash Andretti, the guy whose primer is suggested on the database, is super nice and talks to me all the time.
Flash Andretti is awesome.
Yeah.
He's so cool.
But I knew Elsa was going to be my favorite when I was playing in a tournament, and I just looked at the top card of my library and flipped a Mox Diamond and a Mox Opal off the top to get a counterspell that I needed that also came off the top. And I was like, you know what? I can't play anything else.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's a fun deck.
All right, next is Counterspell. You go first.
Yeah. So when Braden asked me what my favorite counterspell of the year was, my instinct was to say Veil of Summer.
Cryptic Command is very powerful.
Cryptic Command's a very powerful card, and for 1 green, it's pretty okay. But for real, Force of Negation, it's just if you look back at the year, is just such a powerful counterspell, and having a Force of Will is terrifying, and then looking at your opponent and knowing they could have another one is pretty amazing.
I'd say Dovin's Veto, and the reason is sometimes people are going for it and they have a spell in the stack and they feel like they're really, really cool, and they're like, I've got this. I've got this nice Flusterstorm. I'm killing it today. And then you just Dovin's Veto their Adnaz or the Wrath of God or whatever dumb non-creature spell they're trying to get away with.
Yep.
And you just say no. Just say no. And I love it.
Yeah, it's like the game-winning spell, too, and they're like, well, and then they lay out their Pact of Negation, negate, counterspell hand, and you're like, sucks to suck.
You know, I think the most fun thing to do is when you Dovin's Veto a Paradox Engine, and I'm very disappointed that I can't do that anymore. Now, the next category is Creature in the 99. So it can't be a commander card, and I'm just going to spoil it for both of us. It's Dockside Extortionist.
Yeah.
I didn't see your answer until just now. That card is insane.
Yeah.
Do we need to say more?
No, I literally looked through when I saw you wrote Dockside, and I was like, oh, what else is good? And I was like, I don't care. It's Dockside. It is.
I don't... What... Why? Why did they make this card?
Yeah, they have aired.
Someone was pointing out, like, why isn't Dockside Extortionist white? And honestly, it probably should be. But then it'd be in Tymna decks. I don't know if that's a better world to be living in, to be honest.
Yeah.
Would you rather Tymna decks got Dockside? Or would you rather that people actually had to start playing, like, red?
As the person with 8 mono red casual decks, I'm very happy it's in red. Love that card.
All right. The next category is set. So what was our favorite set of this year? And I think if you compare these two sets to any other set that has ever come out at least since Revised,
Yeah.
Urza Saga, these are probably the most influential sets for our format ever.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's because the philosophy of Magic is starting to adapt towards Commander gameplay. My favorite was Eldraine, and yours was
War of the Spark.
So I'd say these are two of the most powerful sets ever made.
Yeah, I mean, when people were reacting to War of the Spark, they were like, oh, Magic's never been pushed this aggressively in a single set before, and that was just for 60 card. Then the cEDH implications came out, and then the next 6 months happened. So this year's been pretty crazy.
Yeah, like how many Narsets are seen played in Vintage?
Yeah.
How many Okos are seen play in Vintage?
Yeah.
I mean, a man died to a Black Lotus that was a 3/3 elk. Think about that.
Yeah, the fact that Karn and Narset are restricted in Vintage is insane.
You know, one card we forgot to mention was Kenner's Transformation.
Mm-hmm.
Just thinking now.
Yeah.
Like, there are so many good uncommons and commons and rares in
Yep.
Eldraine
Yep.
that are just cEDH playable just for some reason. I don't
Yeah.
know why. It's a pretty exciting time to be a cEDH player.
Couldn't agree more.
The format's always changing.
Yeah, I mean, old set reviews from other content creators used to be like 10 minutes long, and now they're hours, you know?
Yeah, like Ixalan. I guess Search for Ascant is cool. All right. What was your favorite thing that happened?
Yeah, both of us kind of had big years as far as things personally happening for us. For me, I bought into the format. I started with my bad mana rock Una deck, and now I have, a full Opus Thief deck. I have several other decks, including Elsa and Grand Arbiter, and I have every fast mana rock that you need. And yeah, it took me some time and some crazy bargain sales, but I'm playing in the format and I'm really happy about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great format. I'm just super happy for you to finally be picking up the pieces, finally playing black recently.
Oh, it's so dirty, but it's so good.
For me, I had a few things that I loved about this year. I got to play EDH with Sheldon Menery, which was a big deal for me. I traded for a Time Twister, which was a huge deal for me. I traded away almost my entire collection just for that one card. And I got to be part of a roundtable with Sheldon Menery, Stibbs, Olivia, Gobert Hicks, and a few other Commander players at the Command Fest DC. And that was awesome. So I had a great year. And also we got to start this podcast. So
yeah, I was just about to say that myself.
It's pretty great we're starting out the new year with this project.
Yeah. Speaking of that, everyone, we have a lot coming up. We are hoping to start producing episodes weekly and really getting this podcast to a running start. So for all of you who have already shown initial support, thank you so much. For all of you who may show it after this episode, thank you just as much. We are so excited to be here providing this content. So thank you from the bottom of our hearts.
Yeah, thank you. I love that we get to do this. I love the support we've gotten, even though we haven't even done anything yet. It just shows how hungry people are for more content and how friendly and kind the cEDH community is.
Great. Braden, do you want to quickly throw out some social media whereabouts for us?
Sure. So you can find us on Twitter at cEDHcast. You can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/cEDHcast. There we have a few tiers that you can check out, with the big one being that when you become a patron, you get access to our private Discord channels, which include a channel which allows you to make suggestions and a channel for quarterly meetings where we have with some of our higher tier patrons. We also have the public part of our Discord, which you'll find the link to in the description of this podcast. Finally, we also have an Instagram where we like to post pictures of us playing EDH with our friends, and whenever we have a new episode, we'll try to link it there too. That is also at cEDHcast.
Great. Thanks, man. All right, for all of you out there, we hope you are enjoying a wonderful holiday season, and if you're listening to this at a future time and it's not the holidays, hope you're still having a great time. All right, everybody, we'll catch you next time.